We have the balance study. In this, you were to create an asymmetric design and from that create a symmetric design. So we have an understanding then of the difference between symmetry and asymmetry. Symmetry is very mathematically precise. Asymmetry is balanced by position, direction, and weight. So you have to have an axis in both. In the symmetric design, the balance is right about in here. And everything we see here is echoed here. And this movement against this movement. So it's basically a mirror image, a reflection on either side of the axis. With the asymmetry, which is what you were to start with, a lot of times people have a more difficult time with that. And one of the reasons they have a difficult time is that they don't set the axis and they don't acknowledge the axis as they are composing their design. So the axis is actually within the structure and it's reflected in the composition. So it's a implied line, if you will. We understand where the axis is in asymmetry because we understand movement and counter movement, or force and counterforce, or weight and counterweight. So there's always a balancing act going on. So in the top design, we need to find that axis. And if we pull from here straight down into here, that's kind of where it is. And we have a movement here, and we have a movement here. And we have this movement, and we have this movement. But this is the axis right in here. So this was also a limited color in terms of the paint, and you were to use recycled or found material, printed material that already exists, along with the paint to create the design. So this pair going from the asymmetry to the symmetry actually works pretty well. The symmetry has a little more warmth to it because of the green and the blue-green. And the asymmetry is remaining fairly cool because it's monochromatic blue. The stripes, these, and these, are repeated here. So we do get a sense of relationship between the two designs. Okay, so here we have in the top, there is a sense of asymmetry. The axis is right in here, and in the symmetry, it's right here. And we have this movement, and this movement, and this movement in that, and then we have this. So definitely took advantage of the collage here and put together something that actually works pretty well. If this is the axis in the asymmetry, how does it balance? We have verticality, of course, and we have verticality. There is more breakup here and less here. There's more darker color, which is weightier. Here, there's a lot more of the lighter gray. We have this movement. We have this movement and this movement. And there's almost a sense of this going on. It would actually work better asymmetrically if there were something here coming in, kind of echoing and completing this movement out here. But very definitely what we have going on is a top to bottom vertical axis that's dividing the weight. And the higher contrast here and the darker color, the amount of the darker color proportionally, helps to balance out the lower contrast over here and a different proportion of value range. So this is the asymmetry. So this actually is not quite balanced. The axis is running here, and this doesn't have enough weight to balance this with this. So the axis is there. We actually need larger shapes or darker shapes over in here. So this is actually unbalanced. So let's just say we took some darker colors here. Now we're starting to balance this out. So see how much more stable that appears. Or we could do something like that. The thing is, what we need here really is, if this is the axis and we have this movement, we need something that is going to come here and counter that. It's kind of like for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So that's kind of what asymmetry is all about. So the symmetry is working really well. And obviously we have the axis straight down the center. And the colors are distributed fairly equally on either side of the axis, so we are not messing up the symmetry, that direct reflection, and the equality of the weight by noodling on the colors differently. So good decisions made there in the symmetry. With balance, even with symmetry, you balance by scale. You can balance by simplicity versus complexity. You can balance by color. You can balance by shape, a more complex shape versus a less complex shape. Okay, so the asymmetry is lacking a axis. It's not really strong. It's there, but it's not really strong. And it probably could be a little more refined. So that would be the axis. So everything needs to move against that. So I would have actually stopped this right here and maybe brought it in from the side. These with this are not working. It's crowding. We have some awkward space there, and they're really not helping anything. There really isn't a good reason for them to be in the design, especially this one. They're just kind of floating and not really attached to anything. If we dropped an applied line down here, that would probably work, but it would be better probably to have something that's doing something like that in relationship to the larger circle. So we have this, and that makes sense. This, though, doesn't really. So if all of this perhaps were part of this, so we had the speckled area with the yellow background, or at least the speckles floating into that gray area right up against this line, it would work a lot better for balancing the asymmetry. Right now it's still having issues. It's kind of like almost there, but not quite. And I think one of the things too is if you squint your eye and you lose a lot of the sense of chroma, you're going to see that there are some problems with it. There you go. See the difference that makes? So in the symmetry, things are working fairly well. Again, the axis is here, and we have this width equaling this width. We have this curve equaling this curve. This distance equals this distance. This equals this. Generally speaking, everything's working here. Getting kind of a little sloppy right down here on the edge. I don't know what that is. It's not really contributing to anything. And I see there's kind of a thing down there too that's really not contributing to anything. Watch for those refinements, because excellent design, excellence is in the details. It's not in the bigger picture. And so the more you can take care of the details and put the details in order, the more refined, the more elegant, the more excellent, and the more effective your design. Okay, we're looking for the axis, and there's a lot of diagonal movement in the asymmetry. We have this diagonal, we have this diagonal, this diagonal, this diagonal, and this diagonal. So where is the axis? It's not really being acknowledged. And the main culprit of not acknowledging it is probably this whole thing. With asymmetry, you can never have a bisecting vertical or bisecting horizontal axis. It has to be off-center in some way. With this, the more complex, the weightier side is here. This isn't actually working well enough to balance this. And we're kind of losing where the axis is. I will say it's probably right in there, but it's not clearly stated, and that's the problem. So this side is a lot weightier than this side because of the curve, and because of this curve, and because of the breakup here. There's just more going on here than there is over here. So how do we make this work? Well, I'd probably move the axis over here, kind of bring it down in there. And I would take this up to it. But then it needs something else going on. And what I would probably do is pull another weightier color, this one with a little bit more chroma, maybe up into here, maybe something like that. But there needs to be something up in here. With asymmetry, the first thing you need to set is your axis, and then you know what to do. And you structure everything based on the axis. Okay, here we have almost a complementary color scheme between the two. And the asymmetry, again, we're looking for that axis, and we're kind of not finding it. It seems like it might be in here. And we have this movement. So then we need to have an opposite movement. And we're not quite getting it. We're starting to get some movement here, but this is kind of echoing what these are doing. So we need something stronger here. The circles were more maybe in here. And they were not so separated so that they would actually read more as a group. And remember, Gestalt theory of proximity, things that are near each other or close together are perceived as a group or belonging together. Now we're kind of getting somewhere. So again, the first thing you need to do is set that asymmetry axis and always know where it is when you're dealing with asymmetry. The symmetric axis is very obvious. Seems like everybody's having a real easy time with the symmetry. And again, we have the darker colors are all on the outside, and the lighter colors are toward the center and in the middle of the design. I think it'd be a lot more interesting if we had something going on like this to bring interest into the center. So taking this into grayscale, you can see that we kind of lose a reason for being in the center of the symmetry, because all of this kind of fuses into a gray field with a little bit of patterning. So if we were to give some weight here, it would be working a lot better. And it would be a lot more interesting if we pulled those three things closer together. Okay, the asymmetry has the right idea. The axis is running right here. And we have this movement against this movement. And we have this sort of teardrop versus the circle. This area is not balancing this area. This is the larger area, and it's also the stronger area in terms of color. It has the greater range of contrast, the greater difference in contrast. This is very soft over here. So it has a sense of being imbalanced. Moving the axis over right into here would be the better idea, and then creating more darkness over in here. And I know that's where your found material is, but since that's your found material, then what you do is you soften the colors over here, which it looks like you probably could do because it looks like this is where the gouache is. But the idea is there. You have the sense of the axis here, and you've got this movement and this, and then all of this. So it's like you're understanding the concept of position, weight, and direction fairly well. It just needs to work together better. And then the symmetry is working really well overall. Again, center axis, and remember that symmetry is mathematically derived. If you remember from geometry, symmetry was a principle in geometry, and there's a mathematic formula for it. And so it is very precise, same distance on either side of the axis. And so the distribution of color here is working pretty well to do that. This could actually have a little more darkness over here to kind of balance out that, but you're on the right track with it. So in summary, to create an asymmetric design versus a symmetric design, in each actually you want to deal with setting the axis. And once you've got that set, you've divided the space, you've started setting up your grid structure, and then you build out your grid structure balancing direction and position, and then you start building your composition. So the mistake that most people make is that they don't set that axis.